Yeah, so how do I describe Frank?
The coins are going to be ready for sale in January 2015. Frank, can you please stop with the lights?
I'm Spectre, and I'm talking to the prompter, although I'm talking to the lens.
CRM says it's 32 Frank Vitalis. 32 Frank Vitalis? Who are you?
CR what?
Have you seen Frank's filmography as an independent?
No, and that's on purpose.
I've seen some of Frank's work. I haven't seen all of the exploitation films as you.
My name is Frank Vitale, and I'm a filmmaker, which is, I guess it's being a director, an editor, lighting person, camera person, producer, and some people do others, some people do music, so it's all wrapped up. But I came to New York, started working for fashion photographers, because that's where all the pretty girls were. From there I slid into working on films. And then I worked on a film with a guy named John Avildsen. He did the first Rocky film and got Academy Award for that. The first one was a film called Guess What We Learned in School Today, where John did what I did with my film East End Hustle. He made an exploitation film.
The first time Mommy slaps his hands when he tries to play with his pee-pee.
A Canon production.
And then I went to Montreal and decided to make my own film. But to take the next step, to actually make your own film, it's a big step, because nobody's going to give you money to make a film if you haven't made one before. I like subjects and styles of filmmaking that really aren't conducive to commercial films. I knew where you had to spend money and where you didn't, so it was more of a practical thing, like common methods of making Hollywood films that really there's no room for when you're doing a very low budget film. I could come up with a good story and then spend 5 years of my life trying to raise money for it, and maybe never get the money. So cost is key. But my own films, I like offbeat stuff. My first feature was done in 16 millimeter, and I borrowed $2,000 from my Aunt Rose.
Johnny, why don't you go out in the back and help your father?
I don't feel like it.
Well, sometimes you have to do things you don't feel like. Go ahead out and help him.
I'll do whatever I want, okay?
No, it isn't okay.
Montreal, Maine was a docufiction film that, before I even knew what docufiction was, where I played a role in it. The film is fun to watch. It's hard for me to watch it because I'm in it, but people enjoy watching it.
You're kidding, aren't you?
Why?
Because your father will send the police over to get you, that's why.
I don't care about him.
Well, Jesus, Johnny, I care.
It was about an artist, a photographer, who sees this beautiful young boy and becomes attracted to him. And his kind of conflict about, like, what does that mean about him? You know, what is that?
You can't stay here.
You're afraid of him, aren't you?
The film did extremely well. It's still playing, still plays in New York occasionally after 1974. How many years is that? 30, 40, 50 years. You know, it's kind of poetic injustice. It was my first film. I thought, I thought it was a failure because it didn't make any money. It turns out to be so far my best film.
East End Hustle.
So this was one of those films where I had a crew of 30 people and we shot in 35 millimeter. It was a film about prostitutes getting revenge on their pimp.
Now Cindy's life is on the line. There's nowhere she can run to, nowhere she can hide. East End Hustle.
But there was sex in the film and there was violence. And it was a disappointment. It didn't do well. It was neither an art film nor a successful commercial film. It was my attempt after my first movie, which did very well as an underground film, but didn't make any money, to try to move into the more Hollywood vein of film production. And one of the stepping stones is to do an exploitation film. a film with a little bit of sex, a little bit of violence, so that you can probably make money from the film, even if it's not good. So people are more comfortable investing, putting money in the film.
Reach for the speed, reach for the whistle, go where the rail may run. Reach for the words.
A fellow named Rick Sigelko saw Montreal, Maine at the Orson Welles in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he loved it. He ended up at WNET and ended up becoming the executive producer of Thomas the Tank Engine. So he hired me to do some stuff.
What's that?
In the show, which was produced in the studio, it wasn't called Thomas, it was called Shining Time Station. They would go to a Nickelodeon and they would crank it and they would look in and they would see a musical story. And those were what I did.
Reach for the story, follow the rainbow sun. To a shining time station, your own imagination waiting there for you.
Funding.
When I moved to the New York area from Montreal, the guy had an antique store. His name was Charlie Powers, and he had worked for the March of Dimes. So he wrote me a letter of recommendation, and that's how I got started there. But I'd really been there for like 25 years on and off.
It's Chris Lima, Lima. I worked for the March of Dimes as we'll just call it a videographer.
Chris is a great person. He came to the March of Dimes, and from the very first moment, he was doing better and better and better and better things.
My name is Chris Kenley. I am a producer for the March of Dimes video production.
And Chris Kenley is the sweetest person you'd ever want to know. And he's helped me on many things, and he helps people that I know. And those guys are they're saints. They're both saints.
I started working at the March of Dimes in 2011, which was 3 years after I graduated from New Paltz. At the time, there was 5 people in the department. There was a photographer, another editor, and my boss was Chris Lima, and his boss was Frank Vitale.
I remember my dad leaving for work one day and saying, like, you got to get a job. You got to get a job. You got to get a job. I got out of my bedroom, walked downstairs, played like 8 straight hours of video games. I hear that garage door open and the phone rings, and it's Frank. And Frank goes, "Hey, Martin just quit. You want a job?" I was like, "Yeah, I do." And my dad comes, I hang up the phone. My dad comes in. I was like, "Guess what? I got a job today." Frank had the ability to ask you a question and then just keep digging and digging and digging until my bi-weekly meetings with him felt like I should have been on a couch.
He's not waiting to jump in. He's asking a question and he cares about what you have to say. He was not restrictive. It was like, if there was a project, it was like, yeah, go shoot it, be creative, have fun with it.
It's not a preset, right?
It is on A.
1, 2, 3, 4. You recording?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I think that I'm a person who didn't want to be sexualized and didn't want to have sex and didn't want any of the things that led up to it. How can I explain that? What happened that caused it? I've made a million guesses.
Anorgasmia was another docufiction film where a woman was playing herself in a role that reflected her life. This is a woman who's written 17 books. She was head of the writing department at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And she gets no pleasure from sex, and that's what most of her books are about.
The parts that cause me the most revulsion are my sexual parts, my gendered parts. Wanting to be a boy was a way to avoid that.
People were very confused. They could not tell if this was fiction or documentary. The film didn't do well. Just didn't do well. Didn't get in any festivals. I still like the film. I still think it's good, but it didn't do well.
So when COVID first started, life changed dramatically.
Filming of all kinds was stopped back in April. And it's kind of starting to come back now.
And the way of doing our jobs has shifted dramatically since then.
I get a lot more time to work. I just jump on the computer for an hour and a half. I can write without going anywhere. I can edit, send emails, beg people to watch my films. It's a lot easier at home. I still think people like to gather. I'm guessing that there's going to be more and more online stuff. It's just proved to work.
I don't think COVID is going to shut the film industry down. I think it's going to change how everything's done. I think people are going to have to get creative with things, to use the cliche, necessity is the mother of invention. So the way people film and the way people meet is going to change.
I don't know if theaters have opened at all in New York. Maybe they have, but if they do or when they do, it'll be, much smaller audiences spread out. I got to think that it's not going to be as much fun to watch a movie that way. And I got to think that the theaters are suffering. Although Kino Lorber, they talk about what they're doing now. They're allowing the theaters to be virtual, so they will distribute their films. They have their own platform, but they also distribute it through AMC or other platforms. Because if the theaters don't stay alive, the distributors don't stay alive. So people are adapting. I don't know, it seems scary.
So you're writing about that, and I love that you're doing that. I think I've told you, when you're making a decision, even if a decision in life, if you think what's the most loving thing to do, you make the right decision. But if you think even in writing.
The Erotic Fire of the Unattainable is a docu-fiction film, which means that people play themselves in roles that are based on their lives.
One of your books.
The Erotic Fire of the Unattainable.
That's enough for me. I want to buy that book.
Maybe you call it a love story or a non-love story. Dialogue is improvised, but it's quite compelling because these are smart people. They have a lot to say.
Don't expect me to go for a second inning here.
These films were screened in a baseball stadium, and they were live, and people they were socially distanced, and they had masks on. And it was on the Jumbotron. They had Q&As with the filmmakers. So I managed to see most of the films. My film was shown Saturday night at 8:30, and a pretty good sized crowd. And then afterwards, people asked questions. It was pretty cool.
Speaking of not being boring, this film, the production couldn't have been boring at all. Very exciting, very free-flowing. Do you think you'll ever go back to traditional filmmaking?
No. We're all filmmakers here, and filmmaking is like just the coolest thing in the world. I absolutely love it. It's the aesthetic. I love the images. I love watching great movies. It can move you emotionally. Making a film, pulling all the pieces together, the production, the shooting, the casting, the editing, you're just building something which is beautiful and exciting.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.